Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread. Sound familiar? It's a poem from Joseph Jacobs' 1890 rendition of fairy tale Jack and the Beanstalk, originally written in 1734 as the story of Jack Spriggins and the Enchanted Bean. Much like this world-famous story, the topic of giants has plagued mythologies, legends, and origin stories for millennia. Nearly every culture that has ever existed had tales to some degree of giant people, whether they were helpful and friendly, peace-loving neighbors, or murderous, bloodthirsty monsters hell-bent on destroying or enslaving normal folk. Giants can be found corrupting humanity and warring with the Israelites in the Bible, and also saving South Americans from invaders. They can hold the entire weight of the world on their shoulders for all eternity, like Atlas of Greek mythology, or can be a one-eyed god of death whose gaze would kill you instantly, like Balor in Irish mythology. But these are just stories, right? There couldn't possibly be hordes of hidden archaeological evidence to back up races of massive human-like monsters from all over the globe. Well, traveler, buckle up, because we're about to travel into a strange world where that one tall NBA player that you're fond of doesn't even come close to the size and raw strength that some of these beasts could possess. Welcome to Giants Scratching the Surface, and welcome back to Infinite Rabbit Hole.
Hey, travelers. Let us take this opportunity to thank everyone for watching the Infinite Rabbit Hole.
If you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now.
And click on the bell so you can be notified every time a new video goes up.
Now, back to the Infinite Rabbit Hole.
All right, welcome back to Infinite Rabbit Hole. Today, my topic will cover giants, as you heard from the introduction. And as you can see on YouTube and we'll hear on the audio versions, Jeremy isn't here with us today because he's moving, and he's pushed us out of the nest to fly or hit the ground. But before we get into the content, let's introduce the hosts that are here for the episode, and then we'll introduce our special guest. Kenzar, how are you doing today?
Oh, just peachy.
Yeah?
It's been
Yeah,
a
you
very
sound
long
peachy.
day. It's been a very long day. And I'm excited
Everything
to
good?
hear all about the giants.
All right. Good stuff. Jeff, how are you doing today?
I am doing quite well. Definitely excited for this episode. I love the topic of the giants, so I'm about it. Let's do this.
All right, cool deal. And then Wes. We have Wes here today. How are you?
I'm great. I'm ready to hear all about this. What you got for us today?
Oh, man. I can't wait to really get into it. And now for our guest for the episode. He's a researcher, investigator, and author of books such as Strange Tales from Virginia's Mountains, Detours into the Paranormal, Water Monsters of the Southern Border, and many more. Today we'll be utilizing in part his book Giants, Men of Renown for our Scratch the Surface episode. Please welcome back for his fourth time on the show, and soon to be another host based off our track record, Denver Michaels. Denver, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I appreciate y'all having me on. It's always fun to catch up.
Yeah, for sure. What's been going on with you since last time you were on here with us? Anything fun?
Yeah, I'm just still traveling around. I'm up in Vermont right now in the banks of Lake Champlain. So who knows? I might have a champ sighting or something while I'm up here.
That'd be sick.
That
That'd be really cool.
That'd be pretty awesome. But yeah, just traveling around. Working on books. Seeing the country, all that good stuff.
Well, good stuff. No, we're really happy that you took time to come on here today, and hopefully I won't embarrass myself with how much you know about this topic. So
hopefully I won't embarrass myself.
Fair enough. Alrighty, today we'll be scratching the surface of giants. When I was researching this topic, it became apparent right off the bat that this topic is, well, gigantic. It's way too much information to cram into one episode, and the evidence for the existence of giants goes way past fairy tale stories like Jack and the Beanstalk, or novels that include giant creatures like Homer's Odyssey, or even stories found in the Bible and the Apocrypha. Stories, folklore, and supposed, I put that in quotes, archaeological discoveries traverse the world. So we're going to scratch the surface today. I hope to discuss a little bit of the origins, some locations of these tales and discoveries, and just get a baseline for the series. In the Giants series, we will not only be breaking into episodes, in the Giants series, we will not only be breaking episodes down by geographical regions, but also getting into topics such as Nephilim, the Great Flood, ancient astronauts, possibly ogres and trolls, depending, and Jeff's favorite, genetic manipulation and chimeras. So before we get into the content of this episode, I know obviously Denver, you know an incredible amount of information about this topic, as well as Jeff. But for the fans, what do you all think about the topic, and what are your initial views of the existence of giants? Keep in mind that most people probably believe that aside from certain NBA players and wrestlers, the idea of giants can be chalked up to mere fairy tales.
Well, for me, like you said, these tales, it's not just in the Bible. I mean, they're global in nature. There's tons of discoveries of giant bones all over the world, but especially in the Americas. And then when you to me, when you combine that with with tales from New Zealand, Native American stories, stories from South America, Mexico, Peru, Europe, there has to be something behind this. And then when you look at the tales in the Bible, other religions have similar stories of these angelic beings or what have you, cohabitating with human women, and producing these offspring of giants. So when you look at that as a whole, I mean, to me, where there's smoke there's fire, and there has to be something behind it.
Yeah, for sure. I know that one thing we have discussed, say with like the Black Dog series that Jeremy is doing, is that this for that topic, it's so widespread that there has to be some hint of truth in it somewhere. We like to say that through the spreading out of people, that maybe there was an original event that happened, or some sort of uh, legend or whatever, and then oral tradition, as people spread out, it kind of carried it over. Um, but this seems a lot bigger than that. And when I was getting into this topic, it was just an incredible dump of information, and I was like, this is probably one of the biggest things I had ever researched. And as far as like the amount of people, places, and things that all were associated with this topic of giants. And I was just like, well, this can't be just one episode, and going into this, I mean, I'm a Bible believer. I know the Bible's origin stories of giants. I believe that David and Goliath is a true story, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit. But that was as far as I had ever gotten with it. And then as I dug more and more and more into this topic, it was just like, well, I mean, personally, I don't know how people could, look into the things I'm looking into and be like, yeah, it's just a story. Like I would do for, say, Black Dogs, and just be like, all this sounds ridiculous. These stories sound so fake and made up. But in this circumstance, it was like, geez, like, I hope I'm able to convey this topic in a way that people can really grasp it. But my intention isn't to necessarily convince people. People are going to decide whatever they want whatever they want to. But yeah, it's pretty nuts. It's pretty cool. Jeff, Kenzar, Wes, anything?
Oh yeah, I mean, so sorry. Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way, dude. There's so much to it, man. Honestly, that in my opinion, there's no way that it's all just make believe, right? Like a lot of things that we talk about, and especially that I talk about, right? I go off into the deep end sometimes, and a lot of that is like you are like nitpicking and like grasping at straws for certain things to try to like prove a point, right? And I'm fully aware of that. But when it comes to the topic of giants, there is so much evidence that even if 95% of it is bullshit, there's still so much evidence, to show that there was giants on
Mhm.
some level. And yeah, there's so many stories, man. So I've got some stuff as well to kind of drop on everybody. But yeah, I'm stoked for this, man.
Cool deal.
Yeah,
I got nothing. I know nothing about giants. So, yeah, I'm excited to hear what you have.
I'm with Jeff on this one. There's a lot of things that we found that definitely leak credence to tales of giants being true, and there's scientific data to back that up as well. I mean, I'm sure we'll get into it, but I'm of the mind that there definitely was at some point.
Holy
Fair
shit!
enough.
Do we agree on something here, Wes?
We'll
Besties.
see. We'll see.
Besties. Man, I thought that the podcast had been fractured forever from our last episode we recorded.
Nah, man, it's all in good fun, man. Can agree to
Absolutely.
disagree. It's all good.
Mhm. All right. Let's get into the origins. I'm not buying it, but we'll continue. All right. So, what is gigantism from a medical standpoint? Gigantism is a rare condition caused when a developing child has a tumor on their pituitary gland. This gland, located at the base of your brain, releases the growth hormone somatotropion, and the tumor blocks the pituitary gland's ability to shut off the supply of somatotropion, and the child just keeps growing. At first, it can be very difficult to notice any abnormalities within the gland, since at first it may seem like normal childhood growth spurts. Fortunately for current medical science, pediatricians know what to look for when it comes to pituitary gland abnormalities, and if detected early enough, can surgically remove the tumors before any extreme height and weight gains occur. However, if left unchecked, people with gigantism often live very short lives as their massive size puts incredible strain on their hearts. There's also an adult form. Same thing, the tumors developed on the pituitary gland, and this one's called acromegaly. And it's where instead of an increased height in children, the pituitary gland causes the bones in the face and the hands and the feet to grow continuously, and also, if left untreated, can cause premature death. So it is a serious thing, right? And in history, there's been several people known for having gigantism or acromegaly. Robert Wadlow, who lived from 1918 to 1940, was the tallest recorded person with gigantism in modern history. Robert, known as the Giant of Illinois, stood at 8 feet 11 inches. The second tallest was John William Rogan. Born in Tennessee in 1868 and died in 1905, he was 8 foot 9 inches tall and still holds the record for the world's tallest African American. Andrei Roussimoff, better known as Andre the Giant, was an American wrestler who was 7 foot 4 inches tall and weighed 520 pounds when he died in 1993 from congestive heart failure. Andre suffered from both gigantism and acromegaly as well. Paul Donald White, a.k.a. Big Show, a famous wrestler, is 7 feet tall and suffered from acromegaly until the 90s when he underwent surgery to have the tumor removed from his pituitary gland. There have been several more people in the past who have suffered from gigantism, and I fear that, like Robert Wadlow, who wanted to study law but ended up traveling with the Ringling Brothers Circus, they were treated as attractions or freaks and outcasts due to their disabilities. As I mentioned before, gigantism and acromegaly are very rare, and although pituitary gland issues do cause people to grow into giants, that's not really what this topic is all about. This series about giants inhabiting the world, both past and present, goes way beyond a few people with abnormal growth in your home city. This topic will be more focused on the idea of an entire societies built with people of impressive size, and yes, also hulking strength. Some accounts detail 6 fingers on each hand and foot and double rows of teeth. So these won't be some poor man that has to live out his life as a circus sideshow attraction, but instead of murderous cannibals, champions of the battlefield, and leaders of some of the most brutal nations that's ever existed in history. And with that, we'll get into some of the origins. In Denver's book, Giants, Men of Renown, he goes into incredible detail of the Bible's accounts of giants and that the Hebrews came across and warred with. Most religious or not have heard of something about the story of David and Goliath. Written in 1 Samuel 17, David, a young Israelite shepherd, is sent to the front lines of a battle between the Israelites and the Philistines by his father to bring back war news from his brothers. The Israelites were lined up with the Philistines, and the champion of the Philistines, measured biblically at 6 cubits in a span, or around 9.5 feet tall, a giant named Goliath from the tribe of Gath, was taunting them and challenging them to send out their champion to fight him. David, seeing the fear of the Israelite warriors, accepts Goliath's challenge, and armed with only a sling, 3 smooth stones, and the power of God, he approaches the taunting Goliath, slings a stone into the giant's forehead, knocking him to the ground, and then David takes Goliath's massive sword and cuts off his head. Usually individuals hear the account and picture an inspiring tale of the ability of a determined individual to accomplish great things and defeat their own personal Goliath. A story of God's involvement in a person's life in the let me redo that. A story of God's involvement in a person's life in line with the verse of Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, or the saying that comes from Matthew 19:26, shortened to, with God all things are possible. And then some, if you're like me and believe the actual story of David and Goliath and have researched the evidence of the existence of Goliath, there's way more. Sorry about that. Or if you're like me and believe in the actual story of David and Goliath and have researched the evidence in the existence of Goliath. But there's way more to the existence of giants beyond what is known or believed about Goliath and his brothers. The tribes the Hebrews fought that were believed to either be giants or whose societies contained a great number of them were the Hivites, the Hittites, the Horims, Avims, Rephaims, Amorites, Jebusites, and many others. But where do the origins of giants start? The biblical account of the origin of giants is in Genesis 6:4, and they were called the Nephilim. They were the offspring of fallen angels, called the sons of God, who procreated with the daughters of men and created men of renown. Renown meaning the condition of being famous or talked about. The corruption of humans at the time and generations of evil plaguing the earth is why God decided to wipe the slate clean with the flood, preserving only Noah and his family, the only righteous ones on the whole earth. However, a lot of people wonder if the corruption of humans included the corruption of the bloodline due to giants existing on the earth. And if the flood was in part to stamp out the giants, and if so, were there dormant genes inside of Noah and his family that may have allowed the corruption to continue in the world post-flood? I mean, personally, I believe that the fallen angels breeding with humans probably took place post-flood as well. From a more scientific perspective, it's curious to me that there were megafauna in the early periods of the Earth, like sloths the size of minivans, but science will tell us that our early relatives were smaller than us. Undoubtedly, there have been many giant skeletons discovered over the years, and we'll get into some of them in the episode and why these findings may have been reburied. The oldest known writings about giants seem to come from the Torah, written by Moses around 1500 BC, and the Rig Veda from India at around 1500 to 1200 BC. And it details an origin/creation story with a giant named Purusha, whose body was broken apart into pieces that formed the world. Like his moon, the moon came from his mind, the earth from his feet, the wind from his breath, and the sun from his eyes. Although I was not able to find where did Purusha come from? I'm not saying it wasn't there, but I wasn't able to find it. Other cultures that existed at the time of the writing of both of these two documents were the Egyptians, Greeks, Mayans, Chinese, Mesopotamians, and Australian Aboriginals, to name a few. And although some of these cultures had some form of written communication, I was unable to find any mention of giants or giant mythology during this time period. But it did happen later on as like like attributing mythologies and stuff later on. But just in this time period, these are the two sources that I had to go off of. What do y'all think?
Yeah, like going back to the David and Goliath stuff. That's really what roped me into this whole subject when I was I remember I I grew up in a conservative Christian household. My family were Pentecostal down in
Mhm.
southwestern Virginia, so I mean we were serious big time Bible believers back when I was a boy. Now, I'm backslidden now. I don't I'm not practicing or anything these days, but those stories always stuck with me. And that I mean I remember being, 7 years old and in Sunday school, and that Goliath tale, the teacher was
Mhm.
talking about Goliath and how many cubits he was, and I'm asking like, well, how much is a cubit? Because I want to know how actual tall he was,
Right.
and my Sunday school teacher told me, well, I don't really know, but I've heard preachers say that he was about 10 feet tall, and I was just like, holy crap, 10 feet tall, because that's you know right up to your
Yeah. Right.
head with a basketball rim, So
Mhm.
to me, that story all really wrote me into the topic, and to me, whatever you think of the Bible or that sort of thing, to me, the things in the Bible that talks about with Goliath, and, it talks about his spear, was like a weaver's beam,
Mhm.
so to give the folks listening an example of that, that would be about 2.5 inches in diameter, or
Yeah.
roughly, as big around as a soda can. If you use the measurements for his armor, it would be about 125 pounds.
Yeah.
It takes a big boy, to wear that kind of armor, and there's just such specific dimensions gave, and you find that throughout the Bible with other giants. It's
Mhm.
these real specific things like King Og in the Bible. There's a verse
His
that gives the
iron
exact
bed.
yeah,
Yeah.
gives exact measurements of his bed, which would be like 13 by 6. So
Yeah.
so if you extrapolate that out into the bed you sleep on, I mean this dude's 12 feet tall, or 11 and a half, 12 feet tall, and the other thing that's interesting about some of that is you're if you're I'm just using those measurements based on an 18-inch cubit is kind of what that's
Right.
kind of like your standard cubit, but you don't really know what cubit it was. If Moses was writing some of the earlier verses, where Moses was writing, was he
Mhm.
using an Egyptian royal cubit, which I think was like 19 and some change. I've seen some Bible commentators use like a 25.2 inch cubit. So
Mhm.
so Goliath and these giants were like 10 feet tall conservatively,
Right.
depending on what cubit you use. So I mean that stuff is just always really fascinated me, and with the detail, and you talked about the 6 fingers and 6 toes. It
Mhm.
talks about Goliath's brothers in the Bible, and and it told that he had 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each hand. And I've seen petroglyphs, with 6 fingers, 6 toes, like out in
Mhm.
Utah, and places where there are native tales of giants
Right.
and things like that. So it's I don't really know where I'm going with, with all of
Well,
that, but
no,
you're
I feel you. Yeah, no, I feel what you're saying with that. I mean, when I was reading your book, right off the bat, first few pages, you're talking about your original inspiration with the topic. And I mean, I was right there with you. Just the conversation of David and Goliath, learning it in Sunday school, all those sorts of things. And I didn't want to add it into here to take too much away from when I talk about the Israelites, like their conflicts with giants and the various biblical giants that there were. But I've looked into Goliath, and it's like, could Goliath have actually existed, or is this a metaphor for, like I was saying, through God all things are possible, or whatever? And there's quite a few biblical scholars that would say yes, he did exist, because of the association of what he was wearing and the way that the Philistine challenger, like at the time of the Bronze Age, that was a very appropriate thing to do for them, is that instead of an entire army on both sides coming together and killing each other to see who's victorious, they'd send out one massive champion, and then the other side would send out their champion, and they'd fight it out, and whoever lost would then be like either enslaved or taken over by the other side. And it was just the way that they did things, and then also what he was wearing, the scale armor for his chest piece, and then it was just that when this story was written, because this was written by Samuel, several years later, but by that time, so much time had passed in between those two events, or the writing versus the event, that if this was made up, it most likely would have been made up for the time period that it was written in, and not have all these representations and all these visuals of something that occurred in history that we then found out about through archaeological discoveries, 1700 years later. So it was like, because of this, the way that it was described, it's almost entirely possible, like 95%, that this is documenting a real thing. The only thing that could be flubbed a little bit would be, his height and maybe the measurements of the armor. But like you said, so specific. It's just like, if I was making up a story, it would not be anywhere near, the specificities wouldn't be anywhere near that. So I really, was digging it and stuff, and really getting into your writing and I mean, Denver, he went super deep into the Book of Enoch and the Apocrypha and all the different the Book of Giants. They're not considered canon, which is like or godly inspired works, so they're not included in the Protestant Bible, although they're included in the Catholic Bible. And I agree with Martin Luther that I don't believe that they're canon, but I do believe that they are good to look into, right? Into study and take away some stuff from him. But the Apocrypha goes deep into giants. There was a passage in there where I think it's the Bible, or the book of Baruch is how you pronounce it, and it was saying that at the time of the flood, 409,000 giants perished. So a lot more than just a couple, right? Just a lot more than just a few Nephilim were created, right? Or whatever it was. And so you got to think, like, were these giants, localized to that central area in the Middle East, or was it, globally, that's where they were? And there's so much information there. And I mean, we'll get into it more about the cultural stories of giants is coming up next. But it was just, I mean, oh man, it sparked my interest. Like your writing of this book, just, it blew me away with how detailed you were, and how, you really just got deep into it and all the different sides and everything. But yeah, right from the start, like your origin story for yourself of just like, yep, heard this in Sunday school, and I was just like, wow, that's all, I mean, I felt it, man. I was right there with you, and I was like, this is pretty sick.
That's cool.
Yeah,
Hefe.
I was just gonna say, I think that there's definitely something to, in my opinion, and I'm sure we'll talk about this at some point down the road, but I definitely do believe that human beings didn't start civilization, what, 7,000-8,000 years ago, as we're all taught, or maybe you could go back to 12,000 years if you're
Sure.
talking about places like Göbekli Tepe or something like that. I don't believe that that's like the origin of human civilization as far as like creating math and language and all the things that we think of. I'm actually under the belief that it goes back tens of thousands of years, if not hundreds of thousands of
Hmm.
years, and that all of these different cultures have all of these different, whether it's a flood story or even talking mud flood or whatever the destruction is that wiped out X population. I definitely think that in those populations that were wiped out were these megafauna humans, right? These
Right.
giant humans, and that they must have been super intelligent and able to help, if not be the ones who created things like pyramids at Giza or
Hmm.
Göbekli Tepe or whatever the case is. So yeah, it's super interesting to me, and it's also interesting to me that most of those, I don't even know the word, those sites are in like the Middle East area where like a lot of the biblical stories, and not just like, the Bible, but so many cultures have stories that come from that area. Even in Central and South America, they tell stories of beings coming from the other side, right? Coming from over there to over
Yeah.
here. So it's interesting that that's like the origin area.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it's almost universally agreed upon that that's like the cradle of civilization, that
Hmm.
that part of the world. I don't think there's many people that would debate that nowadays.
Yeah, it's something I'm going to get really deep into when it comes to, talking about the global flood, because if I'm talking about Nephilim, the next thing that's going to be on the docket is the global flood. And I know Jeremy wants me to do that. Um, I was looking into a story last year sometime. I don't even know the name of the guy, and I hate doing this, but I'm going to have to add it in there. But there was an atheist uh, linguist from, I want to say, like the 1960s, that wanted to find the origin of every language on Earth. We have something like 7,000 languages and dialects around the globe. Could be more, but he went into most of these languages and kind of found the root language that they spawned off of, and then traced them back. And every single language on Earth, he was able to trace back to one single point in the Middle East. For me, it seems that he backed his way into the Bible and the Tower of Babel, when God cursed people and confused their languages and to force them to spread out after the flood. Um, and that's something that's going to be included in there. But I mean, regardless of, like, I'd say from a biblical perspective, if I'm to believe that Noah and his family were the only ones that survived the, great whatever, the great flood. I can't say that word, but
Cataclysm.
yeah, that thing. But he, um, that they would have started in that spot. Um, and yeah, I agree that there's plenty of archaeologists and researchers and scientists and everything that also agree from a non-biblical perspective that everyone kind of started that cradle of civilization that you've talked about. It's just really interesting, but I'm curious as to, and I'm sure I'll get into it as I research all these different topics and stuff, because I mean, I don't see how I couldn't, but where exactly the spreading out happened, because it seemed that, at this point when Noah in 1500 BC, as I said, was writing the Torah, uh, which is post flood. By how many years, I have no idea. Right? I'm in the same boat with Jeff. I don't necessarily agree that it's a 6,000 year time frame or an 8,000 year time frame, because I can't. I do believe in, say, the Garden of Eden, um, as crazy as that may sound to people, but I can't believe that Adam and Eve are created and then, like, the next day or the next week they sin against God. Like, there must have been some sort of time frame. It's like, where did, when Cain was kicked out of Eden because he killed Abel, he then goes and marries somebody. Well, who did he marry? If it was just like a couple of years later. So there had to have been a tremendous amount of time, because then we have, we have an island, or Australia is a really big island, but it's got Aboriginals on it during this time frame. How did they get there, right? Where was the spreading out of people? And so, this idea of giants being all over the place, I mean, I would imagine they would have spread out in the same way as everyone else. And if they were as big as documented biblically, or as we'll get into with some of the discoveries and stuff, I mean, who's going to stop them from just claiming areas and saying this is ours now or whatever, right? And so this was such an interesting topic, and it went so many different directions, and it took me over a month to decide on what actual direction I was going to go on for this episode, because I wanted to throw this in there and throw that in there, and I was like, well, I can't have a 5-hour long episode, and let's look at this reasonably, and how am I going to structure this in a way that it's not going to be taking away from other topics or other sections I could do. I'm not sacrificing content for time or whatever it may be. But yeah, I mean, I absolutely love this topic because there's so much there and it can go in so many different directions. And we're just scratching the surface. Ding.
So, I mean, as someone that is strong in your faith, Jake, do you believe that at one point that all the continents were together in a supercontinent?
I don't see why not. The only thing, if not that, maybe ice bridges. I really couldn't tell you. All that stuff is, if there was hardcore evidence of it, it wouldn't break away my faith at all. Like there's a really good apologist. His name's Frank Turek, and he does like Q&A in college campuses, and he debates atheists and stuff. And he was talking about like the evolution debate, and he said, even if evolution was real, it doesn't take anything away from Christ. Nothing. He's like, even if the process of coming to be here took way longer than what's documented, doesn't take anything away from Jesus. So, because that's, who I'm mostly agreeing with. It's not, how long we've been here, what the continental setup was or whatever, how people, traverse everywhere. Could they have just made ships and then done it, and then, ships fell apart? I don't know, over the years. But it does seem like that would be more likely, certainly, if not, the name escapes me, but the ice bridge that was between Asia and North America.
Beringia.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Because I mean, because one thing that can be seen through genetics is that the Native Americans are very similar, or at least at some point were the same as the people in Asia. So it seems that at some point a huge group of them split off and traversed from Asia into North America somehow, and then spread out from there all over what's now Canada, and then into the United States, and maybe then into South America, or they came to South America in some other route. But it's just like people had to have spread out somehow. I don't think it was magic, or there was teleporters or aliens picking people up and dropping them off. But it's just like,
that's not why I was asking. I was genuinely curious. Because I honestly, as my personal beliefs, I don't consider myself religious. I consider myself more of a spiritual person. But I only ask because I'm a big fan of Occam's razor, right? The simplest explanation is usually going to be the true one, right? And I use it a lot whenever I'm thinking about things like this, and to me that would make the most sense, that at one point we were the supercontinent Pangea, and we just happened to decide as a race that we would spread out, and that's how people ended up at every corner of every continent that we know of today.
And we'll get back into the topic after this, but if I'm talking about the God that I believe in is a supernatural God. If he can raise people from the dead, die and come back to life, create everything from his breath, it's a very supernatural God. So even if like all the continents were together in Pangea, and then once people kind of got more mixed in, he just like on the earth and went like that and just spread all the continents out, just like, I don't know. And then shaved off Half Dome in Yosemite, and then carved out the Grand Canyon. I don't know, but it would seem to be something that would more than likely be the cause, was that either there was land bridges everywhere that are not there anymore, or Pangea existed and everything was much closer, maybe not exactly touching, but a lot closer than they are now.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that with like Africa, and the way it would certainly line up with North America, South America. It seems to just fit
Absolutely.
in there like that. It just like a puzzle piece. So
Mm-hmm.
for sure.
Let me jump in with that real quick. This is kind of off topic, but there's an interesting verse about that in Genesis 10:25, and it says something along the lines of, "In the days of Peleg, the lands were divided." So a lot of people think that might kind of refer to the breaking up of continents, this
Could
that or
be.
the other, whatever. But that's just
Mm-hmm.
what some people have suggested.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, certainly could be.
I mean, being someone that doesn't consider themselves religious, I do believe that all the stories that we hear about in the Bible were, to an extent, actual events that happened, during the timeline of humans. So, I mean, like we were saying at the very beginning of the episode, talking about the giants themselves, like um, there's evidence to back up, a lot of these things that we see in the
Mhm.
Bible. They, maybe not necessarily backing it up to be 100% accurate, but sometimes pretty close. And it's hard to argue with that.
So what do you think about the origin of giants then? Do you think that it was an evolutionary offshoot, or, the Nephilim type thing, or, cuz and that was something that, I mean, we'll get into it. We'll talk about the Smithsonian a little bit and everything,
Of
and
course.
but why is it that there were megafauna, right? I mean,
Hmm.
I'm sure Jeff will agree with me, because we talked about this and the dinosaurs are fake, that when they see dinosaur, he said that when they find dinosaur bones today, dinosaur bones, that they're actually finding megafauna, or maybe the bones of giants, and it's all a big cover up. And I disagree with him somewhat, but I also agree with him to an extent. Um, and certainly, I can't deny that, there seems to be some pretty dang good evidence that there were, like I said, sloths the size of minivans. But
Absolutely.
natural science and, the evolution of how we came to be here will tell you that they were all really small. There's pygmy people, and then there's, tiny, and then we got bigger and all sorts of stuff. Um, and to me, I mean, that wouldn't make a heck of a lot of sense, because if all this megafauna was out there and these animals were gigantic, and then we have the evolved ones that are way smaller and stuff for whatever reason, why wouldn't that be the same scientifically for people? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. Um, it
Well,
just, it's kind of wild. Why
well,
do you think that might be?
the biggest reason why, us and animals and even, the trees, that are around today aren't as big as they are, is because the Earth's oxygen content in the atmosphere is much lower than it was way, millions of years ago.
Mhm.
That's like that's the biggest single factor
The
in
greenhouse
determining.
effect, right?
So, I'm not
Well,
sure if it's referred to as that, like when it comes to like why animals are as big as they are or whatever. I think it's a mix between the oxygen content of the atmosphere at the time that they were around, and evolutionary things. If it was an advantage for that, whatever it is, animal, reptile,
mhm.
whatever, if it was an evolutionary advantage for it to be bigger, then it would have been bigger. you know um and if it wasn't, if it was better for it to be smaller so that it can hide easier from predators, in its own food chain, then they'd be smaller. But you know that's something that is a verifiable fact, from what we for as long as we've been able to track it. The composition of our atmosphere, just during our own lifetime has decreased. So um, yeah, that's my main thing that leads me to believe that it could be possible that there was giants at some point.
Kenzar, you look like you're going to interrupt someone with your comments. You don't.
No, like I said, I don't know much, if anything, about giants. So very interested in the story that you have to share. I like how you're tying it into the Bible and everything as well, because I don't know a whole lot about that either, to be honest with you. So this is just a whole new learning experience for me, and I'm loving it.
Well, I think that's the last Bible reference I'm going to have in the rest of the presentation. Although, without
Hey, I
wanting
learned
to
something.
take too much from it, because I'm trying to do so bare minimum in all these different topics, because I don't want to take too much from the deep dives I'm going to do in there. Because some of these areas, some have some stories about giants, and some areas have a lot of stories about giants, and some areas are just like, I don't want to take too much because I'm going to be left with 3 things to talk about, and it's going to be a 15-minute episode. And it's still there, but it's not as plentiful. And usually that comes from the amount of time that's been that area has been civilized, right, or been conquered by various people groups. Like, I don't know. I think that Greece has been, established for like 4,000 years. So it's just like, how much time have people been in that area to talk about this? But yeah, so, I mean, if you guys are ready, we'll get into some of the cultural stories of giants. All right.
Nobody's ready.
Seeing a lot of nods. Alrighty, giants were, and I believe still are, very much a part of the Earth, and most cultures on Earth seem to have had run-ins with them. Some of these people had obvious mythologies, but what is common with this podcast, we don't rule out mythologies as pure stories right away, but dig deeper into them to see if we can cover some reality that the myths were based on. As we dive into this series, we'll explore regional specific tales of giants and archaeological discoveries, but we'll investigate a few accounts today from around the world. The Native American tribes like the Navajo, Comanche, Choctaw, and Paiutes described encounters with races of giants all over the Americas. The Navajo called them the Starnake and described them as white giants that had strongholds all over the West. They would enslave weaker tribes and have some sort of advanced mining technology. They were believed to have all been killed at some point or just returned to the heavens. In South America, as mentioned in Denver's book, the Aztecs had their own version of the Philistine giant named Zocatzin, an elite warrior that assisted them in battling the conquistadors that attacked the city of Tenochtitlan. The giant was skilled with a sling and never missed a shot, and showed no fear of the Spanish army that was descending on its people. The city eventually fell to the Spanish, and it was assumed that the giant fell along with it. In Japanese folklore, there were grotesque monsters called oni who lived in hell and would come to the surface to feed on humans. They had 3 fingers, 3 toes, blue-skinned, and they were horned giants endowed with incredible strength. They're people who lived evil lives and were turned into the demons, and their job was to torture people in hell who weren't bad enough to turn into the oni themselves. According to these legends, sometimes a person could be so bad in their life that they were turned into an oni while still alive and would spend the rest of their lives tormenting those around them. These are just a few examples of the stories of giants from around the world, but trust me, there's so many. As we get into the regional specific episodes, it will be a Jeremy-style information dump on each episode. But for now, what do you all think of the idea of mythologies and folklores from around the world? Do you think it has any basis in reality at the very root? And if giants aren't real, what would possess nearly every people group on Earth to have some type or have the same type of characters in their own culturally driven myths and legends? Kenzar.
They had to be all over the place.
There you go. That's it.
They just had to be.
We win. See?
That's it. Show's over.
That's it. Show's over. The podcast is dead. We finally
Yep.
succeeded. Everyone's on board.
Nailed it.
Nailed it.
No, I'm curious to hear what Denver has to say because I know he's done more research than all of us on this.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
Well, what I find real interesting, like you said, these tales are from all over. But let's just let me just grab one here that met from Mesoamerica. The Aztecs. They had the Kinametzin giants, and so in the past ages, right, these giants were running amok and just terrorizing everybody, kind of like in the Bible, but the Bible doesn't really say as much about it. You have to go to your extra biblical sources, like
Right.
the Book of Enoch really elaborates on what was supposedly going on back then. But sort of the same thing was going on in Mesoamerica. So the gods sent a flood to wipe out these giants. Well, there was a group of giants, either 7 or 10, depending on which source you're reading. But anyway, they hid in these caverns, and after the flood waters receded, they came out. And the gods had created new people on the earth and everything, and so they kind of subjugate people again. So long story short, one of the giants, his name was Zelwa, and he was an architect, and he built the well, he didn't really build, but had the people, building, the pyramid at the Great Pyramid in Mexico. Gosh, the name is escaping me now, but and that almost turns into a Tower of Babel story, right? This he was building this giant edifice, like we can go up here where the flood waters can never reach again, and then the gods destroyed the pyramid with fire. You can see the parallels there between the stories, a couple Bible stories and stories from Mesoamerica. So again, everything, and in one way or another, so many of these stories are all kind of pointing to the same thing, with more like regional, I guess, differences or interpretations in them. So I whatever you think, I just don't see how anyone could deny that something went on in our prehistory, that something went on, and all these different cultures around the globe recorded it.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the things I find most interesting about this is obviously, right, every culture has a giant, but it seems like these giants also have something to do with caverns or coming from underground, right? Like the Oni, for instance, right? That's what I was going to get to. Hollow Earth, like I've got this, and it's not just my theory, but I got like this working theory that maybe these beings are the inner Earth beings, the Hollow Earth beings. I mean, even like the Hopi, like their tradition is that the ant people came out from underground and helped them start civilizations, right? You got like the giant of Kandahar, who was living in a cave before he was, wiped out by the special forces or whatever. And there's just so many of these. It's like another thing that parallels the giant story is like, yo, they're all up in those caverns, right? And just like Denver was saying, even the Aztec giant stories, they went and hid in the caverns to avoid the floods. And that's what I think is super interesting. I think they're just super advanced giant beings that live under us. Because I know that there's other theories that, that the Anunnaki brought them, right, from planet X Nibiru, and it's like, ancient astronauts and all that kind of thing. I don't really buy that. I think it's just they're under us instead of above us.
What do you think about that Navajo story about them having some sort of advanced mining technology? That kind of tripped me out a little bit. I was like, what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, it
You
makes
know?
sense. I don't remember where I heard this or what it's called, but there is a theory out there somewhere that, you know, super intelligent beings have some device that can literally just expand space, right? It's like the pocket dimension thing that we had talked about
Mhm.
previously on a Missing 401 episode. It's almost as if they have a device that can create pocket dimensions. So you might have a cave or a cavern that's just big enough for you to stand in. And with this pocket dimension technology, you can expand it to the size of a fucking planet in there if you wanted to, right? So I don't know, but it's super interesting to think about.
So like Harry Potter and like their tents and the Goblet of Fire.
Yeah,
Yeah.
same kind of thing. Yeah,
It's
yeah,
magic.
for sure.
Well,
That reference went
I
right
mean,
over
that's
my head. I don't know
that's
anything
probably
Harry Potter.
that's probably
so
like
What?
the best analogy I've ever
you
heard
heard me right.
to kind of grasp what Jeff is talking about. Dang.
Well, these, you know, I also think that ideas for things come from somewhere, right? Like we all
Oh
have a
yeah,
genetic
100%.
memory of something. So like, you know, like what he's talking about with Harry Potter, it's like that wasn't just somebody who just thought of that out of nowhere. Like, no, that there's some deep subconscious genetic memory there of
Yeah,
something that made this
Right.
person think of that. So
yeah, I definitely, I would 100% agree with that, and I would also go as far as to say that, you know, maybe a lot of what we maybe considered magic in the past or even now during the present day is just stuff that we just have yet to understand. You know, I'm sure there's definitely technologies that past civilizations have had that we are unable to create to this day. You know,
Mhm.
I forget, I think it was over in Europe. I want to say it was the Romans. They had a specific recipe for concrete that is like 100 times more durable
Mhm.
and lasting than what we have currently, but it was lost to time, you know, and so we're of the mindset that we'll never be able to you know, make that again, at least exactly how
Because
they
their
made it.
roads have withstood,
Yeah,
thousands of years, and ours crack
yeah,
after a couple months. Yeah.
yeah.
well, that's super interesting too, because even here in the North Americas, the North American mound building cultures, right? Not only
Hmm.
have they found giant bones in some of those
Hey,
mounds,
you
right?
lock
And
it up.
there's articles, right? But like in those mounds, they also found copper tools that were hardened
Hmm.
in a way that we don't know how it was done still.
Uh
So
huh.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
everywhere.
yeah, and I remember reading an article not that long ago that we found tools that showed, I want to say it was evidence that we had reached either like the Bronze Age or Steel Age or whatever you want to call it, like a couple, like I don't know, 10 or more thousand years earlier than what we had initially thought, you
Hmm.
know. So, you know, there could have been certain parts of the world where we just kind of, you know, had a head start or something, or just kind of figured things out quicker than the others, and we were way ahead of everyone else. Um, yeah.
Well, that the this with giants, one of the things that kind of comes back again and again is that they were advanced. You know, they were technologically advanced. They you know, they I think in some cases they, you know, they may have devolved into, you know, into these brutes, but you know, in a lot of the stories, you know, the giants, they have technology perhaps that you know, we really don't understand what's going on, and you know, in the book of giants, which is fragmentary pieces found in the Qumran caves. One of the bad guys in it was his name was Mawe, and you know, he was kind of going back and forth with Enoch, trying to have him, you know, plead with God on the giant's behalf. But just this real curious verse said that Mawe flew. It's
Yeah.
like, And that just go, just a casual reading, or most people just go right over their head. But it's like you just kind of like, what? Wait a minute, my way flew. What do you mean he flew? And in the verses preceding that, it talks about how these fallen angels had taken 200 asses, 200 oxen, and blah 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 for miscagination. So there was, and as as it goes on, it talks about not only were there giants, but there were also monsters. These hybrid type beings.
Yep.
So something weird. I mean, it almost sounds like there was, genetic experimentation going on. And if you're talking lesser technologies, but still, impressive nonetheless. Nonetheless, there's reports, like of a 10-foot iron bow, found along the Ohio River in West Virginia with giant bones. I heard a guy tell me about 12-foot and iron, not even copper, but iron swords found up in Pennsylvania and in some of these places. The Spanish chroniclers, in some of the same areas where the natives had told them about giants that had come over and terrorized the people, in the ancient past. The Spanish marveled at these wells and cisterns that the giants had built. And again, we talked about mounds, pyramids. The giants are oftentimes associated with megalithic building, and I don't believe that's because they were so big and strong, right? I mean, I don't care how big you are. I don't care if you're 12 feet tall. I don't care if you're 16 feet tall. You're not picking up a 110-ton block. It's they were men of renown, not just because of their size, but because of their legendary feats, and that sort of thing.
No, I absolutely agree. I do believe that, the biblically speaking, the reason for the flood was because of the corruption on earth. And I've heard that said in several different ways that it was because of, well, I mean, biblically speaking, the people were so evil that they didn't have like anything but evil inside of them, and Noah and his family were the only ones seeking any sort of righteousness. But then in the meantime, there's also giants mixed in there and stuff. But I've also heard it said that it's possible that and we see things like Gobekli Tepe. I can't pronounce that, but all these older than you'd expect civilizations that at some point they all died out, and we can see the remnants of their societies and the artwork that they did, like the gosh, what is it, Jeff? The when they cut around the stone, and the artwork itself it's not an impression, it's
Reliefs.
There you go. But they this advanced form of artwork that we don't see in any other culture for another 1,000, 1,500 years. And it's just like, well, where'd they learn this? Where'd they figure this out at? And, this jump start in, well, how'd they figure out how to make copper? Like, who told people this, that there was rocks that they could pull metal out of? And how did they make ores and all these sorts of things? Like, where did people come up with this sort of stuff?
Well,
So I do believe personally that there wasn't, and I've heard it said from other sources, but that it wasn't just a like a corruption in the genetic code. It wasn't just a corruption in people's, like, how evil people were. But I agree. I think there was genetic experimentation going on, chimeras being made. I think there was some sort of, technology that may have been lost to time. And maybe it was as easy as an iron sword in a time when people were running around with stone tools. That in itself would have been, so many millennia past, where these other people were. that could have been quote unquote advanced technology, right? We might not consider that as crazy advanced because we're like, well, we got a ICBM that can hit your city from around the world, but that's where we are now. But from that standpoint, that would be way more advanced than the people around them. And so when I say that, I don't necessarily mean that they had teleporters and like phasers and all kinds of crazy stuff we come up in science fiction now. But I do agree that there was, if I think that if demons had been here since the beginning when they're created by God at some point, they must be purview to some kind of information that we don't have, right? Just these beings that have always been here and will be here, and now they're inhabiting these, I don't know, human forms or whatever, and breeding with human beings. There has to be some kind of crossover of information that happens there. Maybe it was giant lead at that point of just like, these beings that are, possessed by demons are showing human beings how to, do things that aren't supposed to be done, like making hybrid people and animals, something that right now we would say, well, not right now, because right now it's a little bit different, but you would say in the past, be like, oh, that's impossible. The genetics just don't line up. And now they're growing human ears on mice. So, I mean, it is what it is. But it's just like, maybe that was the case at the time. So I do buy that. I'm not so closed off that I'm like, nope, it's ridiculous. It was all about, sin and all that sort of stuff. And that's why people were wiped out, because that's what we see now. But it says that God was so, I hate paraphrasing the Bible, but basically so distraught with the creation that he had made, and he regretted it. It's like, well, you have sin now. I mean, and there's some pretty crazy stuff going on. There's genocides, there's all kinds of stuff. What's different now that we don't deserve to be completely wiped off the face of the earth with, just saving the righteous ones on earth versus then? It had to have been more than just that, right? So if I'm going based off of that, then what else could there have been? And, it just leads me down that rabbit trail or that rabbit hole. But yeah, it's wild, and I know I've only touched on, 3 of them, but there truly are just hundreds of cultural significant stories of giants from all throughout history on all the continents with the exception of Antarctica. And maybe there are in Antarctica too. I don't know.
Deep
Yeah,
underground.
see, it's what's that? Admiral Byrd, right? Flying into the hollow earth and seeing the giants in there in Antarctica. But aside from that, it is truly amazing of what sort of a impact these beings had everywhere.
I mean, if it's referenced in every civilization, since the dawn of time, I think it's pretty safe to assume that there's a good chance that they were real.
Man, you're a real shill, aren't you? Anyway.
I mean, hey, sometimes you just gotta let common sense rule, man. That's all I'm saying.
I said they were everywhere.
I mean, you called it.
They're everywhere. I said it. I told you. Okay.
Kenzar, I mean, you were right from the beginning. I'm trying to get these boys up to speed.
I know. Okay. Sorry. I'll let you continue. I'll shut up now.
Any other thoughts before we hop into archaeology?
Nope.
All right. This is a pretty lengthy section, but I'm just going to let it go. Stories and legends are great, but without cold, hard proof, they are just that, stories. So what of the evidence? If giants were and are still so plentiful amongst the earth, then there must be some physical evidence left behind, right? Bones, footprints, dwelling places, and the like have been discovered quite literally everywhere people have ever existed. Here's a handful of some of the larger discoveries. Larger according to me, not in like size or whatever. That was a terrible sentence. Anyway, Richard Dewhurst. What's up? Yeah, big. Richard Dewhurst the writer of Giants Who Ruled America, said that in 1883, the Smithsonian sent out a team of archaeologists to dig up West Virginia's South Charleston Mound, and they discovered several giant skeletons, one measuring 7 foot 6 inches. Yeah, the South Charleston Mound. Yeah, South Charleston. It was a mound. They dug it up. They found giants. Anyway, as recorded in several places, as well as Denver's book, Fort Loudoun in Winchester, Virginia, was built in 1755 under the instruction of then Colonel George Washington. It was built to be 204 square foot fortification with 18-foot thick walls. It could house 450 men, a magazine, and various quarters, and even had a well that was drilled out of over 100 feet through limestone. When the construction was underway, a Native American burial site was uncovered. Colonel Washington reported to his superiors in Williamsburg that the skeletons were much bigger than any European or Native American in the region, and few were measured at 7 feet. The average adult male at the time of reporting was 5'6". Interesting tidbit, Fort Loudoun is also a star fort, which it would pique anyone's interest that listened to our Star Forts episode. This is a news clipping from the Milwaukee Sentinel on October 21st, 1934, and it's called The Lake Erie Giants. Simcoe, Ontario, October 20th. Skeletons 8 feet long have been unearthed in an ancient Indian burial ground on the shores of Lake Erie, leading to belief that a tribe of huge Indians may have once inhabited the region. Here's another news clipping from the Perry County Democrat in Bloomfield, Pennsylvania, October 16th, 1872. This article is fairly long, so I cut it into pieces to highlight the relevant items. A letter from Cayuga, a Toronto paper, gives the particulars of a very remarkable discovery made recently by certain. Sorry, the page is like wrinkled and stuff. Made by, I can't read that word, who were digging on a farm in the banks of the Grand River in the township of Cayuga. When they got to 5 or 6 feet below the surface, a strange sight met them. Piled in a layer, one on top of the other, were some 200 skeletons of human beings, nearly perfect around the neck, with each one being a string of beads. There were also deposits, it's hard to read this, in this pit of a number of axes and skimmers made of stone. In the jaws of several of the skeletons were large stone pipes, one of which Mr. O. Wardell took with him to Toronto a day or two after this Golgotha was unearthed. These skeletons are those of men of gigantic stature, some of them measuring 9 feet. Some of the thigh bones were found to be at least 5 foot longer than those of the present generations, and one of the skulls completely covered the head of an ordinary person. These skeletons are supposed to belong to those rare race of people anterior to the Indians. Some 3 years ago, the bones of a mastodon were found embedded in the earth about 6 miles from the spot. The pit and its ghastly occupants are now open to the view of anyone who may wish to visit there. There is not the slightest doubt that the remains of a lost city are on this farm. At various times within the past years, the remains of mud houses with their chimneys have been found, and there are dozens of pits of a similar kind that just unearthed, though much smaller, in the same place which has been discovered before, though the fact has not been made to the public hitherto. The remains of a blacksmith's shop containing 2 tons of charcoal and various implements were turned up a few months ago. The farm, which consists of 150 acres, had been cultivated for nearly a century and was covered with thick growth of pine, so that it must have been ages ago since the remains were deposited there. The skulls of the skeletons are of an enormous size and all manner of shapes, about half as large again as now to be seen. The teeth in most of them are still almost perfect in a perfect state of preservation, though they soon fall out when exposed to the air. It is supposed that there is gold or silver in large quantities to be found on the premises, as mineral rods have invariably, when tested, point to a certain spot a few yards from where the last patch of skeletons was found directly under an apple tree. From the appearance of the skulls, it would seem that their possessors died a violent death, as many of them were broken and dented. The axes are shaped like tomahawks, small but keen instruments. The bodies are of stone of all sizes and shapes. The pipes are not unlike in shape the putty knife, and several of them are engraved with dogs' heads. They have not lost their virtue for smoking. Some people profess they believe that the Fredden farm was formerly an Indian burial place, but the enormous stature of the skeletons and the fact that the pine trees centuries ago covered the spot goes far to disprove this idea. Sorry, a lot of the words are like the ink is all blurry and blotted and stuff, and it's kind of hard to read it, and the pages are kind of wrinkled. On May 4th, 1912, the New York Times published this small article: Strange skeletons found, indications that tribe hitherto unknown once lived in Wisconsin, special to the New York Times. Madison, Wisconsin, May 3rd, the discovery of several skeletons of human beings while excavating a mound at Lake Delvin indicates that a hitherto unknown race of men once inhabited southern Wisconsin. Information of the discovery was brought to Madison today by Maurice Morrissey of Delvin, who came here to attend a meeting of the Republican State Central Committee. Curator Charles E. Brown of the State Historical Museum will investigate the discoveries within a few days. Upon opening one large mound at the Lake Lawn Farm, 18 skeletons were discovered by the Phillips brothers. The heads, presumably those of men, are much larger than the heads of any race which inhabit America today. From directly over the eye sockets, the head slopes straight back, and the nasal bones protrude far above the cheekbones. The jawbones are long and pointed, bearing a minute resemblance to the head of a monkey. The teeth in the front of the jaw are regular molars. There were also found in the mounds the skeletons, presumably of women, which had smaller heads but were similar in facial characteristics. The skeletons were embedded in charcoal and covered with layers of baked clay to shed water from the I can't pronounce that word. I had it looked up. Sepulcher. That's it. Yeah, got it. New York Times, May 4th, 1908. Giant skeletons found. Cave in Mexico gives up the bones of an ancient race, special to the New York Times. Boston, May 3rd. Charles C. Clapp, who has recently returned from Mexico, where he has been in charge of Thomas W. Lawson's mining interests, has called the attention of Professor Agasalez to a remarkable discovery made by him. He found in Mexico a cave containing some 200 skeletons of men, each above 8 feet in height. The cave was evidently the burial place of a race of giants who inundated the Aztecs. Mr. Clapp arranged the bones of one of these skeletons and found the total length to be 8 foot 11 inches. The femur reached up to his thigh, and the molars were big enough to crack a coconut. The head measured 18 inches from front to back. And a more interesting one that caught my attention during my research: the world's largest prehistoric copper mine in Wales, dating back to the Bronze Age 3,500 years ago, was discovered in 1987. This mine descends more than 200 feet underground and has over 5 miles of tunnels. It's estimated that around 2,000 tons of copper was pulled from it during its usage. Discovered in the tunnels were various items, both from the original miners as well as Victorian miners when it was once again used. These items include bone tools, horseshoes, powder horns, pestles, and mortars. Obviously, the bone tools were from the original ones, and then the horseshoes, powder horns, pestles, mortars. Well, at least the powder horns and the horseshoes were from the Victorian era. Also, there were 30,000 animal bones from sheep, cows, pigs, deer, dogs, and small rodents. Some died from getting trapped in the mine over the years. Some had signs that they were eaten, and others were discovered with their bones placed in such a way that the animals were obviously used in some sort of ritualistic sacrifice. And that's not even the cool part. Ancient Bronze Age hammers were discovered, about 3,000 of them. Keep in mind that the average sledgehammers used today are around 20 pounds. The sledgehammers discovered in the mine ranged from 5 to 64 pounds. The 64 pounders had 9-foot-long handles, and there were thousands of them. Look up this information, and you'll find a handful of websites that talk about these massive tools, and the rest of the rest of the websites just mentioned that there were 2,500 to 3,000 sledgehammers found. Interesting. What do you think about these findings throughout history from around the world?
Well, I'll just say that you would, with all of the myths, you would expect that, right? And you just like you said for your episode here, you scratched the surface there. I mean, you could read off report after report
Yeah.
all day long of this stuff. I mean, just scores of newspaper articles from all over the country, from the late 1700s all the way up. The articles about giant bone discoveries kind of started tapering off by the 1930s, but even into the 40s, 50s, even up into the early 60s, there'd be a few straggler articles out there. I mean, it was just commonplace.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people will try to kind of write this off as well, newspapers back then ran these sensational stories and headlines, but that's the vast majority of these reports, it's not that, because in the newspaper sometimes it'll just have like two little lines down here,
Right.
like Farmer Ed, while plowing found 36-inch thigh bone, that sort of thing. And it's just so common, from that time frame, and not just newspaper reports. You can go through like old county histories. I mean, if you especially like if you live, say, somewhere in the Ohio Valley, thereabouts,
Right.
I guarantee you, if you can get a hold of some of your old county records and things, oh, you'll just see tons of giant
Mm-hmm.
giant discoveries and bones, and along with kind of like you were touching on with strange artifacts too, especially like in West Virginia, Ohio, up in Michigan, oftentimes out of these mounds with with these giant bones that were discovered. We talked about the
Mm-hmm.
copper. They have copper breastplates, bracelets,
Right.
copper crowns, copper weapons and that sort of thing. But they would also you would also have these tablets, with these strange, like hieroglyphic, like just this strange
Mm-hmm.
alphabet on a lot of these tablets. So, I mean, it certainly seems that not only were there giants here, not only did they have some weird. What do you want to say? At least, metallurgy,
Sure. Yeah.
metalworking techniques going on in places that the people were not supposed to have that going on, according
Mm-hmm.
to the mainstream. But they also might might have had some kind of written language and things like that. And in some of these mounds too, they found coins, alongside these. So it makes you
Right.
wonder if they, not only did they have writing, I mean, they might have even exchanged. They might have exchanged money for who knows. I mean, we really don't know what was in place all those years back.
No, for sure. Yeah, it's that one with the one with the all the tools, all the sledgehammers. I think to me was the most shocking because the other ones, I mean, you could chalk it up to he said, she said. They were reports, and that's great. But this, these hammers and stuff were like documented by a lot of people. And I think it is strange, and we'll get into it in the next portion, but why is it that some websites talk about these 64-pound hammers, which I don't know if the listeners know exactly how much that weighs. Go to your gym and get a 65-pound weight and put it above your head and try to just swing it in front of you and don't drop it, and then bring it back and swing it in front of you. Like a 20-pound sledgehammer is a good enough workout in itself. You have to get used to that kind of weight slinging around if if you use those professionally. A 64-pound sledgehammer with a 9-foot handle on it. They said
Yeah.
that the head of it was the size of a cinder block. I was like, are you freaking kidding me?
The handle is twice my size.
Right. And why
Like,
would it be that
wow.
only, sorry, I keep hitting the table. Why would it be that only some websites talk about it and other websites just say, oh, a bunch of sledgehammers were found? It's just like, it seems to be, you know, in the same thing, I'm talking about the evidence of it. Well, okay, well, where are all these bones? Where are all these discoveries and stuff? Because you'd assume that with this big news, and even if it, like you were saying, there's a couple of lines in here because it's Farmer John found, whatever, bone, 36-inch femur inside of his field while he's plowing, and it was so commonplace. Well, then even still, there should have been, some sort of remnants left over, or some museums that hold them, or whatever it is, and it'll be fun to get into that section, but it's just, yeah, it's mind blowing to me because I was thinking that too. It's just like, okay, well, here's all these stories, here's all this, cultural significance of giants. Okay, so then where are they, right? And then as soon as I opened up that can of worm, I was like, oh my gosh, and I was like, I didn't expect to find so many news articles of it,
Oh
even
yeah.
if I suck at reading, I hope I was able to convey that, reading aloud, I hope I was able to convey that, interest in to the listeners in that, you know it's so common, and I'll have links to that in the description of the audio version so the listeners can check that out. But I encourage people to really look into that because there's just, from what I found, dozens and dozens and dozens of, like you said, very common newspaper clippings of just like, yeah, and then this happened anyway, and it wasn't like some like, I'm gonna get famous off of this. It was just like, you go to the general store and report, yeah, found another one of those, one of those skulls that are 2 feet thick. Wrecked my plow on it, just like, okay,
It was
it's
very,
nuts.
it was very commonplace back then. There was, there was no reason to really dispute it. And and I think a lot of that reason, back in the days when most of these discoveries were taking place, the country was much more, you could kind of say more of a Christian nation back
Sure, yeah,
then, or at least, you know, um, more
more
people
conservative,
believed
yeah.
in the Bible, so they more or less took for granted that there were giants on the earth in those days, as it
Hmm.
says in Genesis. And so I think that, in a lot of ways, that's why a lot of that stuff is reported so matter of factly. Because there literally are. I mean, any of your listeners, I mean, they can find this stuff easy for themselves. You can go on going to Library of Congress archive in America, and you can spend a day and a half just pulling up old newspaper reports of giants. But like I said, if anybody that like in the Ohio Valley out that way, if you can look at some of those old like those old county histories, things like that, I mean those things are just just a gold mine with these things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to plug something here that might make it a little easier, because you're right. It's not hard to find this stuff, but you know how people are these days. But a resource that I use a lot when I'm looking into giants, especially in the Americas, if you go to avalonlibrary.net, there's all kinds of crazy stuff there, guys. So be ready. But there's a book that you can get on there called "The Ancient Giants Who Ruled America" by Richard Dewhurst, and it has, I mean, it's hundreds of pages long,
Yeah,
and
that's a
half of
good
the
book.
book, right? And there's so many articles in that book just from the Americas of stuff that they were finding in the late 1800s, early 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
But one, I'm just going to read one. I know you read like 20, but I want to read one that stuck out to me the most, and it's called it's from the Charleston Daily Mail. It's on September 20th of 1916. It's called "The Horned Skull of Sayre, Pennsylvania." And it says Sayre is a borough of Bradford County, Pennsylvania, 59 miles northwest of Scranton. The exact year is not clear, but during the 1880s, a large burial mound was discovered in Sayre. It was reported that a group of Americans uncovered several large human skulls and bones. The skeletons belonged to anatomically normal men, with the exception of bony projections located about 2 inches above the eyebrow. It appeared that the skull had horns. The bones were characterized as giant, as they were representative of people over 7 feet tall. Scientists estimated that the bodies had been buried around 1200 CE. The archaeological discovery was made by a reputable group of antiquarians, including Dr. G.P. Donohue, the Pennsylvania state dignitary of the Presbyterian Church, A.B. Skinner of the American Investigating Museum, and W.K. Moorhead of Phillips Academy, Andover, Massachusetts. According to historical accounts, the Sayre horned giant bones were sent to the American Investigating Museum in Philadelphia. The artifacts were later reported missing. They were horned giants.
Up in that same area, they found like mass graves of like giant bodies and things, like like as if a battle or something had taken place.
Yeah,
So it's
1,500 skeletons
yeah,
here,
just
800 there. Yeah.
crazy. And that Pennsylvania and Ohio, West Virginia, there's a lot of great discoveries come from that area. But those horn giants, yeah, that's I don't really know what to make of that. That's pretty weird.
It is pretty weird.
Yep. And I put
Can't
it in the
argue with
chat
that.
here, just if anybody wants to Google an image of it while we're.
Yeah, the images are really really kind of bizarre.
I'll be sure to look that up after this. Alrighty.
Oh,
100%.
I've seen these things before.
Is it wild looking?
Yeah.
It's
Nice.
crazier than you think. Yep. And again, they're like
you wouldn't want to see one like when you're at Walmart.
Okay,
dude, especially if they're 7, 8 feet tall. You don't
Oh,
want to see.
I've seen these before. Yeah. Here, we'll for the listeners, we'll take a picture of these and we'll put it inside of the or at least for the people watching on YouTube, we'll take it and put a picture of it like right here so that you guys can
I'll
see
post a picture as I was reading it.
it. This is pretty sick.
Yeah, let me plug a real quick resource for your listeners out there that really want to dive deep into this giant stuff. You can go on academia edu and download a free PDF of Ross Hamilton's book, and it's called A Tradition of Giants. I'm probably screwing up the subtitle here, but the elite social hierarchy of prehistoric America, something like that. But anyway, A Tradition of Giants is that's the main title by Ross Hamilton. And it's a little hard to follow in some places, but it is just a wealth of you know historical reports, and he's got a lot of some of those lesser known things, like from county histories and stuff like that in there. But then he also kind of traces some of the old Native American tales, and gets into the Adena, and the mound building cultures and things like that. So anyone that really wants to do a deep dive, that's one of the best books out there, if not the best.
Good stuff.
And you can get it free.
I mean, that's even better. Yeah, for sure.
Sold.
Yeah.
Jeff, what did you think about the Fort Loudon being a star fort, as well as being on an Indian burial ground filled with giants?
Yeah, well, that doesn't surprise me at all, man. Honestly, I mean, people have been building things, whether it's star forts or pyramids or mounds, right? These are all almost always built on ley lines, right? And there's something to like the geomancy, the magic of the earth, and building these things on ley lines. I don't know what it is. I've heard so many different theories about it and this and that, but does not surprise me that you'd have a burial mound, star fort, and I guarantee you, if somebody looked at the map of that thing, it's right on a ley line somewhere, and it probably lines up perfectly with, take your pick of the other pyramids or obelisks around the world. It's all connected.
Yeah, another interesting thing with that, I used to live about 10 miles from Winchester, where that fort's located. But they discovered those giant skeletons there. But over in town, and whether you believe in this stuff or not, whatever, but it's pretty common for people to spot, late at night, a couple of 7 foot tall Indians walking around. And most your average person isn't familiar with that giant bone story. You got to kind of be a nerd for this stuff like me to really, you know what I'm saying, to really know, even if you live there.
Thanks,
most
Denver.
like 99.7% of the population in Winchester's got no idea about the giant bones that were uncovered in that fort. So I just always thought it was kind of interesting that people have those tales of giant Indians walking down the interestingly enough, Indian Alley late at night, and people describe them as 7 foot tall. So for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, for sure. Fair enough. All right. Y'all ready for me to get into the next portion?
Oh yeah.
All right.
Go.
Did you say hoo-yah?
I said, oh yeah.
Okay. Well, thank goodness.
I'm no Marine. Come on.
Next section. Why the secrecy? Now, I know what you're wondering. If all of these have been found, and they no doubt would have been major news, then why haven't I heard of them? And why aren't these giant skeletons in museums? Well, that is the question of the day. Why would the evidence of these archaeological findings just disappear? We often go to the role of the so-called alphabet soup agencies when it comes to the lack of evidence of Bigfoot or aliens, but why giants? For that answer, we have to dig a little into the history of the Smithsonian, America's #1 go-to institute for all things historical. The Smithsonian, founded in 1846 by James Smithson, a mineralogist, chemist, and philanthropist, contains over 155 million specimens, art pieces, and objects. It's separated into 20 separate museums and is quite an impressive sight to see, so I've heard. I lived near there for 10 years and never went. Waste. However, the Smithsonian Institute has a rather interesting backstory. It's not just a museum, it's also a part of the U.S. government, and its Board of Regents contains members of Congress. It's actually so intertwined into the government that you can't even sue them without congressional approval. The Institute was originally founded to be, quote, an establishment for increase and diffusion of knowledge among men. But what kind of knowledge can we expect to be fed from the government? Well, whatever they want us to believe. For example, there have been over 25,000 archaeological digs to validate people, places, and times written about in the Bible. And although there are some biblical exhibits, you'll find more examples of an entire skull built around a single tooth or a half-inch bone fragment with a plaque stating that this is what you evolved from. And you can expect that whatever the current narrative is, that you'll eventually find it in the Smithsonian. Like the June 23rd, 2021 article in Smithsonian Magazine, aliens may already have discovered us. Interesting idea from an institute that you expect to focus solely on actual discoveries and real history. The point is that any government agency can be expected to do what government agencies do: feed the public with what they want you to know and not tell you what doesn't fit into their plans. In my personal opinion, the topic of giants may deter too far from the evolution narrative and point toward the Bible, so like any other truth they don't want you to know about, it's buried. But then again, there could be a more nefarious purpose. Because after all, this is the US government. Maybe giants, much like Bigfoot, are completely brushed over or the evidence goes missing because the information would open up a government-sized can of worms and expose current projects like chimeras, the hybridization of people and animals, or the theorized genetically enhanced super soldiers being created in labs with demonic hosts dwelling inside their cold, clammy husks they called skin. Thanks, CERN. Jeff, I know you have something to say about this.
Which part? Yeah. The Smithsonian or the chimeras?
All of it.
Both.
Well, yeah. Okay. First of all, like the Smithsonian, definitely a bunch of fishy business going on with that. I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I've seen some. Dude, I just read that article to you about the horned giants, right? And now
Yeah.
that didn't get sent to the Smithsonian, but you know, it's the same story over and over again. The thing here's the problem. The problem is, let's say, Jake, you go out and you just start digging around, and you come across some discovery in your dig. Okay,
Mhm.
you're legally obligated to report that if it's some, you know,
Right.
scientific discovery or something like you have to report. You can't just keep it a secret.
Something of
So you
scientific significance, you know.
right. So you report this. Who shows up to take over your dig? The Smithsonian. So they do this weird thing, and I talked about this in the Dinosaurs Are Fake episode, where, you know, people will always say, oh, well, it's not just, you know, people involved with the Royal Society here or whatever that discover stuff. Look, this 12-year-old girl discovered this dinosaur skeleton. And it's
Mhm.
like, okay, she hit it with the shovel, but the Smithsonian came and took over the dig. And the 12-year-old girl's no longer allowed anywhere around it, right? And that's how it
Right.
always goes. And those things always disappear. It's very similar to what the Vatican does, where the Vatican will get their hands on something super important and they'll lock it away in their dungeon of knowledge that they have that nobody's allowed access to,
Yeah.
right? So that's one whole thing. The Smithsonian, I could go on for days about the Smithsonian. The Chimera thing, 100% that's real. You know, it was a conspiracy theory for the longest time that the government was doing, you know, genetic experiments, not just on splicing DNA from different animals together, but actually with humans as well, which is why they have deep underground bunkers where they can go down. I think the law is like 7 miles under the ground, like the laws don't apply. So
Hmm.
they're doing whatever they want down there. You could do human experimentation down there with no oversight. And even if there was, you're talking black budget stuff that Congress doesn't even know about that's happening.
Right.
But I think that this was happening, it has been happening for thousands and thousands of years. So going back to the ancient astronaut theory, I don't think that aliens came down here and like spliced our DNA with, you know, or their DNA with monkeys or whatever and created us and all that stuff. Well, no, what I think is that these giants or the Nephilim from underground, right? They have this advanced technology. I think that they were splicing DNA to create us, and that we were created either as a slave race for mining, or who knows what the reason was, you know, that's a whole other thing. But that's what I think, that they created us as a chimeric project, right? And I mean, it just goes deep, man. Like that's the nutshell version of it. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Wow.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that was but this is the end of my presentation. That's as far as I go with this. So yeah, I mean, but I knew that you would have a lot of information on the Smithsonian and chimeras and genetic manipulation and demonic hosts dwelling inside of
Oh,
cold claiming
yeah.
husks. Like you
And
just
super soldiers,
Yeah.
man. That again used to be a conspiracy theory, right? It was just made up. But you can go look right now, mainstream news, that not only us but like China and other countries are working on super soldiers, and we've had super soldier projects in the works for a long, long time. And again, we all know, right? The military industrial complex, they're 20, 30 years ahead of us.
Mhm.
And then the black budget stuff that even they're not overseeing is who knows how much older than that. So super soldiers, totally believe it's real. Does that mean like your SEAL Team 6 guys are all super soldiers? No. We're talking like, outfits you don't even know who they are, right? Unnamed.
Was that
Black
not what
budget.
the whole MK Ultra thing was? They were trying to experiment on people and create super soldier type people.
That was mostly using. Okay, so MK Ultra split off into like a bunch of different projects, but most of that revolved around like psychic abilities and things like that. So they were doing like LSD experiments and radio wave experiments and all kinds of other light wave experiments on people, trying to utilize people's psychic abilities or intuitive abilities to do like psychic assassin work, where they would pinpoint where dude was on the other side of the world, just sitting in a room meditating on it or whatever the case was.
I thought Ultra was more about being able to control the mind of their assassins. Their would-be assassins.
That too.
Where they could literally just say, code phrase, unlock something in their head that they don't even realize is there, like like the what's it called, the Bourne movies,
Right.
Yeah,
that too. I mean, like creating Manchurian candidates and things like that. I mean,
yeah.
Charles Manson was like one of the, and I use the
was
term
just
victim
gonna
of
say.
MK Ultra, and there's a lot of that too. And you look at like the rise of serial killers, right? Kind of coincides with that same time period, and also like the end of Vietnam, which we had talked about before.
Yep.
But yeah, there was so much going on with the MK projects. It's not just MK Ultra. There's literally like you could put MK and think of a word, and there's a project called MK, whatever the word is, doing something in the realm of mind control, psychic stuff, or whatever. But that it wasn't exactly the same. But I wouldn't be surprised to find out, hey, there was a MK Chimera project, super soldier project, probably.
Huh.
What do you think about that?
Denver knows about this, right? Denver, back me up, bud.
No. I mean, it's not something I've really gotten into a whole lot, but yeah, there's I've got some theories about a couple things going on these days that relate to those projects, but I'll keep that to myself.
Fair enough. You can actually go listen to my newest episode on Shadowban Podcast, and we did a whole. I was talking shit about it for like an hour and a half about society being manipulated by MK Ultra.
Yeah,
stuff,
But if I could circle back to the Smithsonian real quick, to me the fascinating thing about the Smithsonian, and I'm not saying I don't know if or necessarily even believe if there's like an ongoing conspiracy to hide giant bones from us. I don't know, and really that's all secondary and doesn't really matter. What excuse me, what I think is so fascinating is the way that they're sort of able to just gaslight us all, right? Because they'll say, if you could, cause there's no shortage of like Smithsonian magazine articles about all those goofy people that, used to talk about giants or believe in, just these,
Right.
just the way that they just dismiss it, and they're so condescending about it, and they truly are gaslighting us, because you can go on their own damn website, download their own reports to the Bureau of Ethnology, specifically the 5th and 12th report, where they show you in their own reports where the Smithsonian agents were digging in Charleston,
Mhm.
West Virginia, throughout the Kanawha River Valley in West Virginia, in Ohio, Tennessee, and places, doing these mound surveys. And they tell you about their own agents, recovering these bones, measuring them, reporting that they were, 7.5
Mhm.
feet long. And, and not only that, but I mean, they in that those documents, they've got specific instructions for how everything was supposed to be packed up and shipped to DC. And they're just like, oh, giant bones, oh, I mean, it's just, I mean, they can, and then they'll say things, oh, in the, oh, back then, people didn't know how to measure, and, the measurements were a miscalculation. It was your own damn people doing the measurements,
Yeah.
and some guy digging up a bunch of bones. I mean, okay, maybe he mismeasures a little bit, but like, you're gonna know if this skeleton here is exceedingly large, right, compared to the normal skeleton you dig up out of the ground. I
Right.
mean, I mean, it's almost genius the way that they're able to get away with just gaslighting us like that, making us question, our own sanity over this stuff. Because you can, like I said, if you throw out all the newspaper reports, all the county histories that we were talking about, just read their own documents, and you can get them on their own website right there.
Right.
It tells you. I mean, like in the Kanawha River Valley, I think they, I might have my numbers messed up, but I think that their own people, recovered, gosh, like, I want to say like 17 giant skeletons from that area. And going back to what we were talking about earlier, that's not a mere statistical anomaly, right? I
Mhm.
mean, that's not just, oh, well, that's just a really tall guy. He must be good at basketball. No, I mean, this is more than just a really tall guy or two. If you've got like 17 or however many
200 of
skeletons
them.
right
Yeah.
there,
Just like
and and
yeah.
if you expand that out from giants, in Tennessee, Ohio, Kentucky, supposed pygmy bones.
Mhm.
That's a whole other can of worms. That's a whole other series of episodes. But the point I'm trying to make is there's been all kinds of these discoveries. The bones, always shipped to the Smithsonian, but what happened to them? I'm not saying that there's the Indiana Jones warehouse. I don't know, but at the bare minimum, all those bones were dumped in the Potomac, 40, 50 years ago, I think. And whatever was left, I think, as far as the giant bones after the NAGPRA law, the Native American Graves
Mhm.
Protection and Repatriate,
Yeah.
easy for me to say, Act, became law in 1990. I think anything that they may have had, kind of sitting in a corner somewhere was shipped off to various tribes, and then they would have you know reburied them or done whatever. So um anyway, the point of that is just the Smithsonian is they're just gaslighting us.
I agree. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's generally the case with most things in my experience. The mainstream narrative for anything you can pick, it's just to gaslight you, right? So, and I don't want to get off into a conspiracy tangent, but that's just the way it is. Like chemtrails, for instance, they'll say that they're contrails,
You
but
love your chemtrails.
I'm just saying, Kenzar's seen me do it, right? She's seen me.
Oh, he loves his chemtrails. He
She's
goes
seen me do it.
off on people.
So
It's
Mm.
so
yeah.
so much fun to watch.
the gaslighting, that's the key, man. That's the key to make you look crazy. Nobody's gonna listen to you if they think that you're crazy. So
Yeah,
Well, I
and
mean,
then once you get pissed off because they're gaslighting you, and then start talking all fast and waving your arms like I was just doing, you really look crazy, and then nobody will definitely listen to you. So it's all part of the plan.
yep.
I mean, Jeff, you talked about it in the past, the rise of the term conspiracy theorists and how it was, just like Denver's saying, used to gaslight people into, if you are figuring things out and things aren't lining up for you and you've got questions about it and you're questioning the narrative or whatever it may be, they'll turn around and tell you that you're insane and tell everyone around you that you're insane. Oh, he's just a conspiracy theorist, because he's curious about what happened, all these dang discoveries about these giant bones, right? It's like, and make you seem like you're the bad guy or people should stay away from you. And it's just like, I mean, the second that I learned that the Smithsonian, was part of the U.S. government, it's not a institution by itself. It's not its own standalone thing, like you'd expect a museum to do or to be, and that its board of regents has Congress members on it, and that you can't sue it without congressional approval. I was like, oh, well, then they'll just do whatever the heck they want. It's like, why would they care about you or what, you want to know or whatever it is? Like, if it doesn't fit in whatever, like we were talking to before this episode started, we're talking about, it sure as heck seems like everyone's being brainwashed into believing in aliens. You see some flares out in San Diego and everyone immediately like, I saw the aliens, I saw the ships. And it's like, wow, this brainwashing is going really well. And it's like whatever they want you to think is what they're going to push. For me, I think that it would, like I said, open up a government-sized can of worms and maybe expose some secret projects if it's allowed to get out of hand, or it points too far away from the evolutionary idea, because you can't have this, increase of like, people and upright walkedness and blah blah all this sort of stuff, and you see this, that scale of like the ape going into the man that's standing up with the spear in his hand. If you have these 15-foot tall giant people with advanced civilizations and technologies also along the same lines where the early humans are supposed to be, and it's just like, well, that doesn't fit, let's get rid of that, and so it's, why would it happen? I don't know, but that's my thoughts and my feelings around it. That's my final thoughts. What about you guys? And also, giants are real.
Curiously, around the time that evolution, did become mainstream, that is around the time that these bones started disappearing. Your newspaper articles, your discoveries started tapering off, and that sort of thing. So, at least is in regards to that, you've got a point there.
I have a point.
I was gonna say, I think giants definitely existed. They were real. I really hang on. I've been hanging on to the tools and whatnot, like the sledgehammers.
Mm-hmm.
64 pounds is so heavy. Like
Yeah.
I mean, I lift on average 50 pounds every day, right? But 64 pounds starts getting heavy lifting that over and over. And then you put it on a sledgehammer and now you're swinging it over your shoulder. Like, you got to be a big person to be able to lift that.
Oh, giant sized person.
With a 9-foot with the 9-foot handle on it. That is literally twice my size. That's insane to me. So that alone, just that's all the evidence I need, and I cannot wait for you to get deeper into this so I can learn more, because this has been so much fun.
Yeah,
I've
for
enjoyed
sure.
this quite a bit.
I mean, geez, Denver brought in like chimeras pretty hard, talking about the Book of Giants and stuff. I mean, we might get into like the Minotaurs and all that stuff, all those Greek mythologies, and be like, yeah, it's all real. Here it is. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be really cool. We could go a lot of different directions with this this topic. I'm very stoked for it. And Jeff, I don't think you'll be surprised when I tell you that I didn't listen to your episode on American Giants at all. Not a single second of it.
I am not surprised because you hate me.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's okay.
He sent
That's
that
a
to
good
me.
one.
What, 3 months ago? I
Months
never listened to
ago.
it.
Yeah. Pretty sure I sent it to you when I did it like a year ago. Over a year ago.
A
That's
couple
okay.
weeks ago.
It's all good. No worries. When we get into the American region, I'll just regurgitate all the same stuff, so you'll get it.
Cool deal.
one way or another.
Wes, final thoughts?
Like I said before in the beginning, I definitely believe that it's possible for there have been beings, that was considered giants, even to this day, what we would consider giants. But I don't know. The reasons why we may not have found evidence of that, due to government cover-ups or whatever, I don't know if I really necessarily believe all of that. But who's to say that giants aren't still around? No one's seen a giant and Bigfoot in the same room, same time. So maybe
That is
that's
a point. Yeah.
what people are seeing up in the Pacific Northwest and whatnot.
That is also a theory. Yeah. That that going along the lines of chimeras, that Bigfoot was created at some point or is still being created, and that's why, like, I think it's Roosevelt did all the national parks, right, to keep people away from these genetic experimentations and stuff. But that Sasquatch, Yeti, Yeren, abominable snowman, all these different things, and giants go very closely hand in hand. That's not necessarily my department. That would be more of a Jeff thing to throw in, during episodes. But I'm sure that he'll have that covered, because that's probably something he's researched a lot of. But from a surface level of not being someone that would dive very far into conspiracies and government cover-ups and stuff, this little blurb about the Smithsonian is about as deep as I go, because I'm more interested in what can be proven versus speculated on, I suppose, or more so proven than speculated. But I can't say with 100% certainty that is incorrect, right? That it doesn't make sense when lined up in a certain way, or when you kind of get into it and stuff. Like, it's just, there's so much unknown about even giants, with as much as we know about giants, and unknown about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeren, whatever you want to call it, or whatever it looks like in different regions. There's so much unknown that you could add so much to it, and without knowing all the facts, you could say, well, these do line up, right? And maybe that's because of, there's so many gaps in the stories, and so many holes. And maybe that's because they do actually fit together. It's tough to say, but certainly that's a topic that Jeff knows an insane amount about, because I mean, he's always talking about it, so he has to know something, right?
Yep.
Getting the nod of approval.
Did it. We did it. We
Yep.
brought Bigfoot in.
We did
We
it.
did it.
That's
we
right.
did it.
You're welcome, Jeremy.
Damn, I was literally
Yeah.
about to say that. Pull it out of my mouth.
Yeah, see, we got out of the nest and we flew. We didn't hit the ground.
We did it.
I stuttered my way, and then I gained some altitude. But Denver, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. I know you've done it before. This is your 4th time on the show, but can you please let the travelers of the Infinite Rabbit Hole know where they can find you, find your books, and what's going on with Denver?
Yeah, sure. Best place to find my books. Just go to Amazon. Everything's there. I'm active on Twitter. I've got a Facebook page, but mostly Twitter's where I'm the most active. And just go to my website, denvermichaels.net. I put out a blog post once or twice a week, and then you can find links and descriptions to my books there.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no, on that same point, when I was doing this research, some of the topics I was looking up to add to this, there were links in Denver's website for those specific stories, like the one from South America and stuff. Not only were they in his book, but they were also on his website as well. So a lot of information there. I definitely encourage people to go and check out his website and get plugged in. So, my hope for the listeners of this episode was not to convince any of you of giants, but to give you a baseline of the series that I'll be presenting. Much like our topics of the paranormal, aliens, cryptids, and strange happenings, the topics are interesting regardless of their believability. After this episode, I'll do a poll on our Infinite Rabbit Hole Facebook group for which region you want to explore first. The source of this episode was Giants, Men of Renown by Denver Michaels and various websites. All will be listed below in the descriptions of the audio versions. Thank you for taking the time to join us on this episode. Be sure to check out our website, infiniterabbithole.com, for links for all of our social media pages, information, and merch desires. And we'll see you next time on the next path of the Infinite Rabbit Hole. Bye.
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 Wes, you got to say it.
Wes, unmute yourself.
Wes.
You can't go until you say bye.
I forgot I was muted. Bye.
Denver.
Bye, everybody.
All right, there we go.